Dean, thank you very much for the extraordinary opportunity to be allowed to come and be part of the Sanders series. Carl Sanders was running for governor, sign of age, I guess, when I was a freshman at Emory. And for those of you, this is an arcane piece of Georgia history, but interesting about how the world changes. Governor Sanders ran at a point where, for the very first time, the Georgia unit system, Georgia had a county unit system, which had grotesquely overvalued rural areas and guaranteed that nobody from the Atlanta area could win. And that system was thrown out on the grounds of clearly unequal representation. And Sanders ran really in the first modern campaign in Georgia history and was, in many ways at the time, seen as an extraordinary visionary and reformer. And in fact, there was serious talk at one point of him being a vice presidential candidate, and he had enormous capability. And so there's a real honor to be allowed to be here and to be part of the lecture series in his honor. In addition, we had a great time. I don't know if the students had a great time, but I had a great time, and we explored a lot of ideas. And you know, for somebody who was an Emory alumni to be at the university, and a historian to be allowed to be at the law school was almost more duality than I was ready for. So I'm delighted. Thank you. And then this evening is even an additional joy to be here. And I commend Stephen for the leadership he's shown. And he's learned one of the keys to leadership, which is doing. I mean, the fact is, you get to be a leader in part just by filling vacuums. And if you see something that needs to be done and you go do it, after a while people think you must be a person who goes and does things, and then they think you're a leader because you're leading. And if you get that habit down right, and in the process you learn a lot of experiences, because the act of filling vacuums, inevitably you make mistakes and you learn from them, and you gradually get to be a little bit better at it. I'm going to talk about three quick things. First of all, it occurred to me, because several people were asking me questions on the way over at a practical level about the art of acquiring power and of getting things done and of achieving things. My younger daughter, Jackie, and I have a book coming out next month called 5 Principles for Life. And it was originally designed as a children's book, but it turned out to be sort of an every person's book. I'm going to tell them to you briefly, because particularly those of you who are thinking about going on beyond law school or beyond whatever level of work you're now doing, and those of you who'd like somebody to get into politics, they're actually very simple principles, but they're very real. The first rule is to dream big. I mean, if you can't dream big when you're young, you probably won't learn how to do it later. So, you know, and you have any dream you want, whether it's, you know, the kind of life you want to live, or, you know, the kind of profession you want to be in, or whatever. But it really helps to relax and allow yourself to have dreams that are large enough to pull you forward. The second you'll find a little more daunting, and that is work hard. And I just want to say to all of you, if you really want to be at the top of your league in whatever you pick, it takes an amazing amount of work. And if you look at Tiger Woods' practice schedule, it is daunting. If you look at anybody who is a first-rate lawyer, they work very hard. If you look at anybody who's a first-rate politician, they work very hard. If you look at somebody who's a very successful entrepreneur, they work very hard. Lots of people would like to be successful if they could do it on 25 hours a week on the days when they feel like it. And I've yet to find out how to make that happen. So if you dream big and work hard, the third thing may surprise you a little bit. You have to learn every day. And I'm now 65, and I've done a variety of things that they were introducing me with. And I try very hard to learn every day, because the world changes constantly. What you want to achieve is more complex than you think. And the things around you change. I mean, you go from being a child to being a young adult. You go from being a young adult to trying to find somebody to marry. You find somebody to marry, suddenly one morning there are kids. The kids change every day, and the things that worked when they were 2 years old don't work when they're 10 years old. Nothing works when they're 15. And then later on you get to know each other better when they grow up. And so there's constant change around you, and the more you can learn, the better off you are at learning and combining that with working and then focusing on your dream, the better off you'll be. The fourth lesson is to enjoy life. And I cannot overstate this. This doesn't mean life has to be always happy. It doesn't mean it has to be always pleasant. And by enjoy, I don't necessarily mean that it's all one big long birthday party. But if you're not doing something which gives you satisfaction, You cannot discipline yourself to do it long enough to be successful. And the genius of America is at allowing people to find a hobby they really love and then convincing somebody to pay them 40 hours a week to do their hobby. And then after they get done being paid, they get to do another 40 hours a week at their hobby because they really like it. And at around 80 hours a week, they get really good. And among one of the fields I wanted to go in when I was young was paleontology. And every paleontologist I know lives that kind of life. They love collecting fossils. They love working with the fossils. They think it's amazing that museums will pay them to collect. They're thrilled to go do it. And they're just happy. One of the people who taught me this lesson was a friend of mine who owns the Bull and Finch in Boston, which is the original site of Cheers. And he was actually a Harvard business graduate who had an MIT undergraduate in engineering. He was working for a big corporation and he just hated it. And he went to a consulting psychologist who worked as sort of a job counselor. And the psychologist said to him, "What do you really like doing?" And he said, "I really like hanging around bars and talking to people." And the guy said, "Well, then why don't you open a bar?" So he opened the first disco, this time ago. He opened the first disco in Boston. It became enormously successful. Remember, the discos were totally bare space with a bar and somebody playing records, to which you charged a cover fee. And so this became the social place to go. And so people would line up all the way around the block to pay $15 for a non-event. I mean, you had a guy playing records. And this guy made a killing. And he then went over to Britain and bought the bar, which he then moved from Britain. It was, I think, a 17th century bar, which he moved to Boston. And that then became the prototype for Cheers. And so anytime you see it, and so when Cheers was still on TV in a big way, it was the #2 tourist spot in Boston. And above it was the Hampshire House, which he also owned, which was a very, very good restaurant. And at one point he went down to Disney and Disney has 2 courses. They have a 3-day course on how to treat the customers, and then a 3-day course on how to treat the people who take care of the customers. And he took the 6-day course, he came back and he doubled his sales with what he learned at Disney. And so, but he was having a ball because he loved people, and now he had hundreds of thousands of friends who would come through and leave some money behind as they drank a pint and went on. So you have to enjoy life. And finally, I think you've got to be true to yourself, and that's because all of you will live lives when you can move anywhere, you can move anytime, you can live virtually anywhere, and so you'll always have the potential to lose yourself in strangers, but you won't be able to lose yourself from you. And so I share those with you only because a number of people today in various situations have talked to me about how do you once you leave the campus, what do you do with your life? My first goal for you would be really relax, spend some time with yourself, and figure out if you could live out your best dream, who would you be? And then be prepared to work hard and learn every day to become that person, and make sure that you're doing something that gives you satisfaction and where you're really glad you're allowed to do it. If you do all that, I think you'll be astonishingly successful. And you don't know how you'll be successful, but you'll look back later on, and it'll be a great run and a lot of fun. The second thing I want to talk about is the scale of change we're going to live through. You all potentially play a very important role. We have to rethink at least 3 major components of our current legal system. One is we need very dramatic litigation reform because we have become, over the last 45 years, radically too litigious a society to be competitive in the world market. And we have to find a more orderly and a less expensive method of conflict resolution that enables us to have an ongoing competitive society. Because my guess is we now have a 1 or 2% of GDP disability because of the sheer scale of our litigious society. This is because it has second and third order effect. It's not just the cost of the lawsuit, but it's the cost of everything, for example, the doctors do to avoid a lawsuit. And so the scale of defensive medicine is breathtaking. It's also the degree to which if you're going to build your next factory, you probably don't build it here because you don't want the exposure. And so between the degree to which the government has become too litigious, including state attorney generals, and the degree to which the society at large has become too litigious, including advertising, and all of you have seen the ads in the afternoon, you know, where somebody basically comes on TV and says something like, "Hi, do you know somebody with money? Would you like to consult? Between us, we could find a way to mug them. Free legal consultation." I mean, watch these ads someday and write down 3 or 4 of them and look at them for a little while. You know, hasn't somebody somewhere done something wrong to you? Call me and we will find a way to get money out of them. I mean, it is the opposite. I mean, starting in the mid-'60s, the system has gone nuts. And it's partly that we've changed the risk factors in litigation, and it's partly that we had this goofy rule that you can now advertise, which I think is essentially for the law is stunningly socially destructive. Because it means you have thousands of ads a year that say to normal people, you should be able to pick a fight with somebody. And the result, for example, is the number of towns which have closed their swimming pools because they can't afford the liability. Well, I'm not sure the society is a whole lot better off because kids can't swim anymore because of the sheer risk involved in liability. And there ought to be some way to rethink that. So litigation reform is a big part of what you're going to have to do. The second thing I think you're going to have to really work on is rebalancing the court. And that's where we had a lot of fun, and I was really delighted to have a chance to come and give a series of talks about the whole current imbalance of the court system. And if you look at it, starting in 1958, when the War on Court asserted judicial supremacy, we have gone down a trail which is in the long run very, very dangerous. No group of people can be given unlimited and unchecked power. And Lord Acton caught it right in the 19th century when he said power tends to corrupt, absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you look at some of the recent court decisions, they're grotesque. The idea that the U.S. courts are now the primary guarantor of your safety because of their intervention in Boumediene and beyond is nuts. I mean, they are taking on themselves responsibilities which could become literally life and death. And one of my propositions is going to be that if any of these terrorists cause any major crisis after they're released by a court, that judge be impeached the following day. I mean, this is how you've got to reestablish responsibility. And these guys are currently totally irresponsible. And we generated lots of material. What's the website?
Judicial supremacy versus co-equal branches.
That's the website? As you can tell, Vince is a lawyer and thought that he would pick a short title. Judicial supremacy versus what?
The shorter one, whomakesthelaw.com if you want.
The shorter one is whomakesthelaw.com. That was his idea, it was a simple one. You can tell we never went into advertising. Anyway, we put a ton of stuff there if you're at all interested in following that. It's a very interesting topic and one which I think will be a major political question over the next 20 years. The third area that's really worth you looking at is the issue of lawfare. Increasingly, the law is being used as a weapon of war. And it's also being used as a weapon of commercial war. And I just was talking to a major American company yesterday, which is it's a pharmaceutical company, under continuous generic lawsuit by Indian companies who have figured out how to use our legal system to maximize the rate of converting the generics so they can produce them. And they said it's amazing. And if you look around the world, the degree to which, for example, the recent suits that were filed, or case filed in Spain against the Bush administration, I mean, the degree to which people now use the law as a field in which to wage conflict is a fascinating development of the last 25 or 30 years and would have been unthinkable prior to World War II. Would never have occurred. And so it's worth you looking at because that's a zone that we Americans are simply going to have to master presently in order to be able to compete in the modern world. Anyway, that's sort of a sweeping overview. I'm going to give 2 last big things. In your lifetime, expect 4 to 7 times as much new science in the next 25 years as we had in the last 25. That is a scale of change you should be aware of. About 65% of it will come from outside the U.S. And it means if we get the smaller number, which is 4, that you are, if you're trying to understand 2034, which for most of you will be in the middle of your working life, that's as much scientific change as we've had since 1880. 1880 was pre-automobile, pre-airplane, pre-electric light, pre-long-distance telephone, pre-motion picture, pre-radio, pre-television, pre-computer. So imagine that's going to happen between now and 2034. If we get 7 times as much new science, it'll be the equivalent of you being with Sir Isaac Newton in 1660, trying to understand today. That's how big the scale of change is. The other point, last point I'll make to you is, you are going to live in a world in which China and India are real and unavoidable, and the only question you have is whether you want to fundamentally reform the country enough to compete with them, or you want to decay elegantly and avoid the competition. But you're not going to have any, there'll be no middle ground. If we want to compete with China and India, we will have to fundamentally reform litigation, regulation, taxation, education, health, energy, and infrastructure. And to get a slight taste of that, I urge all of you someday, watch the movie 2 Million Minutes, or go to the website 2mminutes.com. 2 Million Minutes is 4 years of high school. The movie was done by a health entrepreneur who sold a device for about $400 million and took the money and went to India and China. Turns out 2 Million Minutes is 4 years of high school, and you are able to, he studies 2 Indian high school students, 2 Chinese high school students, 2 American high school students. At the end of the movie, you will conclude that we are a nation rapidly preparing for the 1956 Olympics. That we are so out of sequence that we need fundamental reform. At 2mminutes.com, he has posted the Indian 10th grade exit exam, which you have to pass to get into the 11th grade on the academic track. It's in English because the Indians study in English, and no American student has passed it. About 4,000 have taken it. It turns out that in India, by the end of the 10th grade, you've taken 4 years of physics taught by a physics major. Fundamentally different model. The Chinese are comparable with a greater emphasis on math and business. But the intensity is totally out of sync with anything we're doing right now. And just take that and then go to the other topics I mentioned, and you have some sense of what the next 25 years is like. The last comment I'll make is all of you should calculate well, we don't have the number yet, do we? Okay. All of you should calculate, or you could check at americansolutions.com in a couple days. We're trying to figure out how much will you pay. You're a little bit old, but we're starting with a 20-year-old this year who will have a 50-year working life. And how much taxes will they pay just to pay the interest on the debt Obama will run up over 8 years? And the number will be breathtaking. You'll be stunned how much money you're going to spend. Because we're basically like a family that is going on a giant vacation on a credit card and has no intent of paying it off. So we're going to pay credit card interest every month for the rest of our life. It'll be very interesting when you see the real numbers. So I've given you a sweeping, was that sweeping enough, Dean? Okay. Sweeping overview, and I thought I'd toss it open for questions. Is that all right, Stephen? Is that what we're supposed to do? Okay. So you guys are in charge. I'm supposed to repeat the questions in case there are people in the other room. Yes, sir.
I guess there have been rules lately on short selling in the stock market. Do you think there's any fear of making short selling the dollar in the future illegal because of fears of inflation and taxation?
No, I think, I mean, shorting the dollar?
That's right.
They couldn't stop that. If the dollar gets shorted, it'll be shorted overseas. I mean, the problem you'll have with the dollar is if people refuse to accept it. And if they refuse to buy U.S. Treasury notes. And that'll happen if the inflation rate starts up. I mean, the great fear you've got to have is that the sale of U.S. Treasuries, I'm sorry, and the question was about short selling the dollar for people in the other room. The challenge you've got is that U.S. Treasuries are artificially inexpensive right now because there's been a flight to safety. And so people are accepting extraordinarily low interest rates. I think it was 0.03 overnight funds recently. The danger you have is the morning people decide they're not afraid anymore because they won't accept that interest rate. And the British recently had this happen. They offered, I think it was $2.5 billion in treasuries and had to pull the offering because they couldn't sell them. And so once that starts, interest will go up pretty dramatically. And when you start having interest go up on the scale of the debt we're running up right now, it gets very expensive very fast. Yes, sir. Should we pass a balanced budget amendment? Yes, as a general principle. We balanced the budget for 4 years while I was Speaker and paid off $405 billion in debt and did it while cutting taxes for the first time in 16 years. And we did it because we imposed on ourselves. We came within one vote of passing a constitutional balanced budget amendment. We passed it in the House, got within one vote in the Senate, and decided that we would behave as though it had passed. So we made a deliberate act of will in, I think it was April of 1995, that we'd just go ahead and balance the budget anyway. And people thought it was impossible. We said we'd balance it within 7 years. They thought that was impossible. We balanced it in 4. And it was a very interesting experience. Clinton and I figured out one time, we spent 35 days locked in a room together, negotiating. I mean, just day after day, hammering out a deal. It was a long process. Other questions? Yes?
You've been a proponent of smaller government basically your entire career. I was wanting to get your thoughts on the recent talk in the media, and as particularly at Obama's press conference, on your thoughts about the legalization, regulation, and taxation of marijuana.
I've been a proponent of smaller government, and what are my views on the legalization and taxation of marijuana? That is as big a jump as I've seen in a long time. I'm against it generally. I think this is a society which is gradually trying to get rid of tobacco. I hardly see it as useful to add marijuana to the things we'll presently try to get rid of. And I think that the scientific evidence is pretty clear. It alters the brain. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that India and China are suppressing us in terms of education. What do you suggest we do radically here in order to catch up? Because that is a very great task, I think.
No, it's a good question. The question is, what should we do to catch up with, in educational terms, with China and India? It's a very good question, and let me tell you part of why I am now for extraordinarily bold change. When I was a relatively junior member, I held town hall meetings in 1983 on a report called A Nation at Risk. And A Nation at Risk said that if a foreign power were doing to our children what we're doing to them, we'd consider it an act of war. And it went on to say that the title came from, our education system is so bad that the nation is at risk. Okay? Nothing much happened. I helped create the Hart-Rudman Commission to look at national security out to 2025, and we spent 3 years looking at it in the most sweeping national security review since 1948. And we said in March of 2001, the greatest threat to the United States is a weapon of mass destruction going off in an American city, probably from a terrorist group. And the second greatest threat to the United States is the collapse of math and science education and the collapse of investing in research. And we went on to say it is a greater threat than any conceivable conventional war. Now that's how big I think it is. I wrote that sentence myself, but we got a bipartisan commission of 14 people to adopt it. Okay, and not much has changed. So what would you do? And I wrote a book called The Art of Transformation, which really outlines how to think about change on this scale. The first thing you do is you set your values. My value is learning. I actually don't have a value for sitting. I don't have a value for curriculum. I don't have a value for tenure. I have a value for learning. Okay? So I'd like to maximize the rate of learning. Second, I'd like everybody to learn. I mean, we've had 2 generations of adults who've been cheated. So you have millions of people who are illiterate. You have other millions who are semi-educated. So you got to think about learning for all Americans. Okay? I think that learning will ultimately grow out of the existing system around us. That is, the modern school system in the form you're used to is a product of the 1840 to 1870 industrial era. And that's why people sit in rows, and it's why they go for 55 minutes and they take a break, because it's actually pre-training for working in a factory. Okay, now almost none of you will do that, and in fact almost no modern factory is like working in a factory. So let's take a brief census of 2 models. One is technology, the other is incentives. I'm going to start with technology. How many of you have a laptop computer? Okay, good starting point. How many of you have a cell phone with a camera? How many of you have an iPhone? Okay. A G3 iPhone is the equivalent of a 2-year-old laptop in computing power. How many of you have some kind of other PDA? You know, a BlackBerry or whatever, Trio, okay. Just trying to give you a flavor here, right? How many of you have used ATMs to get money? How many of you used ATMs outside of banking hours? Which means that there are no banking hours anymore. Because there are 24-hour banking hours, 7 days a week. It's just that they're mechanical. right? So the bank is technically never closed. Just think about that. If I said to you, what are the hours of your bank? If you measure it by ATM, they're universal. Now, I'm trying to lay a rhythm here. Okay, for example, we should give I testified to this in 1995. People thought I was just whacked out. Because here I'm the brand new speaker, and one of the things I did, I went to Ways and Means and said every child should have a laptop. If you gave every first grader the equivalent of a Kindle, or better yet, give them Negroponte's $400 laptop, and you put all their textbooks in the laptop would be cheaper. And you could have actually current science texts, because you could edit them in real time. Just take that. I mean, I don't know how much you all spent on text while you were here. But it ought to be a scandal. I mean, I'm quite serious. It ought to be a scandal. There's zero reason text should be as expensive as they are. It's a ripoff. I mean, it's a conspiracy between faculty and publisher. mostly aimed at the students. You know, I mean, ask a similar question. Why is higher ed so expensive? I'll tell you anyone know what the real answer is? Because they can get the money. I had this will be truly terrifying, and you do not have to associate yourself, and you may apologize to your faculty later for inviting me. I had this great experience. I want to test this on all of you. I'm going to give you two more examples about transition and then talk about incentives. I had this wonderful experience last week. I went near Branson, Missouri, to the College of the Ozarks, which I'd never knew about before. The College of the Ozarks is a 100-year-old institution, private institution, which only accepts applications from students with financial need, and gets so many applications it only accepts 10% of its applicants. In order to go to the museum, to the College of the Ozarks, you have to have a willingness to work 15 hours a week. And it's real work. And you have to be willing to work 2 40-hour weeks during the year, during the school breaks. If you do that, you have tuition free and you have textbooks free. If you're willing to work in the summer for 12 40-hour weeks, you get room and board free. Now, here are the numbers I want all of you to think about. This is a very interesting cultural question. These are poor kids. 92% graduate with no debt. 8% graduate with debt. It averages $5,000, and it's usually a car. Now, just think about it. So one of the things I'm thinking about is making a proposal to American Solutions to every governor in the country that they create one work college in their state, modeled on the College of the Ozarks, so that no child in America can claim they couldn't go to school. What they can claim is they didn't want to work. But I just want you to think about how different that model is, and think about how that would shake up universities. Second example. One of my incentive ideas, I believe passionately in incentives. In fact, I once created a program called Earning by Learning, where we took speech money I made and we paid students in public housing $2 a book for every book they read in the summer. And one of the radicalizing moments of my life was having a 9-year-old in Villa Rica, Georgia, who read 83 books, got paid $166, and was promptly in trouble that September because she was too aggressive. She went back to school and she wanted to read. The teacher said, "We're not reading. You're ahead of the curriculum. Sit in the corner and wait. We'll get there in 2 years." She literally got in trouble within 2 weeks because she was a rate breaker. She wanted to actually be unique. Just as Bob Compton has posted the Indian math curriculum on his site and has a 12-year-old in upstate New York who's doing calculus, which means, of course, he's breaking every New York State curriculum rule. So here's one of my ideas I want to test on all of you. First, inexpensive step at fundamentally changing education in America. If you can graduate from high school in 3 years, you get the cost of the 4th year as an automatic scholarship. How many of you could have graduated from high school in 3 years? Raise your hand. Do it again. Raise your hand. How many of you think you could have gotten out in 3 years? Okay. You just testified that we wasted a year of your life. Now, we're not going to compete in the world market wasting a year of your life. So that would be an example of the scale of change I'd have. The other change I'd have is tell me what kids ought to learn, and if they learn it, give them the grade. If that means they come in 3 times, fine. If it means they come in every day, fine. But the whole current model is basically bureaucratic stupidity. You know, it's a Carnegie unit. How many hours did you sit? It's a test of your rear end. Okay, next question. Yes?
Looking at the projected rising deficits and growing debt, could it potentially begin to handicap our country as rising debt and interest payments handicapped the French government in the late 18th century?
No. The way you asked that question, the answer is no. I'm sorry, the question was, thank you. The question was, could the rising debt of the U.S. government and the rising interest rates handicap us on the scale of the French monarchy in the late 18th century? And that's technically not plausible. You'd have to have probably 400% of GDP in debt. The French monarchy was collapsing. On the other hand, could the inflation rate tick up fast enough that by 2012 we would re-experience Jimmy Carterism, which is 13% inflation, 22% interest rates, and 22% interest rates on this level of federal debt means the carrying capacity of the debt would be unbelievable. Is that possible? Sure. I think that's, in fact, I have several economists, I think this is, Emily, isn't it right to say we've had several economists say it'll be higher than Carter, that they fully expect the amount of liquidity being put in the world market will absolutely drive the dollar to very high inflation rates. I mean, if that happens, we'll be in a big mess. And I personally expect us to have inflation within 2 years. 1 or 2 last questions. Way in the back. Aren't you coming over here next year?
I am.
Okay. One of your future students.
What you think we need to do about healthcare reform, and if you anticipate that we would have to move to a system more like that of European countries.
The question is what we need to do about healthcare reform, and do we need to move to a more European system? I think we have to have a very American health reform system designed to create a 305 million payer system in which everybody has insurance, but the insurance is for them, it's not for the government. And I think you want to have a very effectiveness-oriented system that starts with health and wellness and prevention, and then with disease management, and only gets to acute care at the end. And if you want to see that in real detail, I helped found the Center for Health Transformation, and at healthtransformation.net we have an entire program that's pretty elaborate and gives you a pretty good sense of that. So I think one last question, I think, and then we're going to go to reception. Okay, yes, sir.
You talk about terrorism and what you do with judges who release people who later became terrorists. What's something that we can do to change our image across the world, hopefully to reduce the breeding of terrorism across the world?
The question is, what can we do to change our image to reduce the breeding of terrorism across the world? I think virtually nothing. I don't think the people who are terrorists are confused. One of the key leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood in the last generation came to the U.S. in 1948 and was absolutely appalled that waitresses waited on him in inappropriate clothing, that Americans clearly were obsessed with sex. This was 1948. You can't imagine what today would be like. And that by every standard, Americans have this stunningly naive misunderstanding. Sharia is a stunningly medieval law. These people believe in a medieval law. I'll give you an example. I always tell audiences like this. The people who hate us most are irreconcilable. And the reason they're irreconcilable is that the first point of negotiation would be kicking all the girls out of the room. Or women, whichever term you prefer. Again, you're all young enough, you probably want to be women. If you're slightly older, you'd like being girls. And I don't think we're going to do that. I mean, a second example would be honor killing. You know, the son has the right to kill his sister or his mother. The father has the right to kill his daughter or his wife in order to protect the family's honor. Now, I doubt very much if we're going to accept that. Although in some European countries, they're now openly debating it. I mean, the British have actually said Sharia can count as civil law, which is crazy. I mean, literally crazy. So you start down this road. The thing, Bill O'Reilly had video last night that he showed while he was interviewing me of a girl, a 17-year-old girl being beaten by a man in northwest Pakistan for having talked with a boy. A girl was hung in Iran for having walked hand in hand with a man. She was like 16 and he was like 40, and they weren't married and they walked hand in hand in public. And she had therefore impugned the morals of the culture, and she was hung 2 years ago. I mean, I don't think we understand what real repression is. And so these people aren't confused. Bin Laden's not confused. None of the remember, the key leaders of all the terrorist groups are medical doctors and engineers. These are not impoverished, ignorant people. These are people who want a different world than we do. And they are prepared to kill to get to that world. And I think that's a big problem. Now, there are lots of people in the middle, and I think, to some limited extent what Obama's doing may be useful. But if you look at the first round of his going overseas, it was not very successful. I mean, were there big crowds? Yeah. Did they all applaud? Sure. Are the Europeans doing anything more in Afghanistan? No. Are they doing anything more in Iran? No. Did the UN Security Council on Sunday do anything about North Korea? No. So what we now have is, whereas we used to get stiffed all the time because Bush was surly and unpleasant, now we get stiffed because Obama's nice and pleasant. I mean, they all go, glad you're really nice. The answer is no. I mean, I'm not sure that's a huge advantage. Reagan had a totally different model, and Cliff and I just did this movie on Ronald Reagan, Rendezvous with Destiny, which is really worth seeing just because Reagan is one of those people you can't describe in print. When you see him on the screen, he's like a great athlete. I mean, the body language, the tone of voice, the gestures. I mean, this guy understood leadership on a scale that is just historic. And Reagan understood that the world will follow the United States if we lead calmly and persistently. And the Bush people gradually got better. For some reason, they came in with a huge chip on their shoulder, and they just blew it the first 2 years and caused all sorts of enmity. But the fact is, if you try to lead by appeasement, you end up at the weakest person defining what you're doing. And that's an enormous challenge if you're dealing with a dangerous world. And so, on the other hand, you have to lead, because if you don't lead, you can't get anything done. And I'll just close this thought because it's one of the great tragedies of the Bush administration is that he in particular was so stunningly inarticulate that even when he was right, nobody could figure out what he was doing. And so, and let me give you the example that I went back and I tried very hard to fix and failed totally. We were able to liberate Iraq in 23 days because we had literally half of Kuwait as a staging area. We had Air Force command and control inside Saudi Arabia. We had a naval and marine facility in Bahrain. We had Qatar as our reserve station. We had troops transiting across Jordan secretly. I mean, the scale of participation by the Arab world was unbelievable. The Egyptians were a staging area. And yet the administration couldn't bring it. I was down at CENTCOM before the war, and on several occasions with Tommy Franks. There were 50-some countries located at the Central Command in Tampa. And every one of them had their own facility, their own offices, their own flag. They met in a room like this every morning. And they were all collaborating. I was there one day when they were getting the Dutch to give them 2 C-130 aircraft and a frigate. And then somebody else was giving them a battalion of MPs, and somebody else was coming in with a field hospital. And the scale of that effort in the early days was unbelievable. And that's the America you want to be. You want to be an America which leads collaboratively, listens carefully to its allies, negotiates when it has to, and decides when it can't avoid it, but also remembers that it is in fact leading. And I think that's a very hard art form, and I think Reagan probably did it as well as anybody has since Eisenhower. And you saw that in the total collapse of the Soviet Empire, which was a very specific project Reagan undertook, and is one of the great historic achievements of the last 50 years. Thank you all very much. I think we have a reception, and look forward to seeing all of you.